I'm Dan Drake. This is Front Up, and we have with us today Rick Atherton, Chairman of the Board of Selectmen, and we presume a candidate for re-election to the Board of Selectmen. Is that correct? Have you filed?
Well, that's correct. I pulled my papers, Dan, and for a while, maybe thinking about it, I talked to a number of people, and I feel good. I collected my signatures. I filed my petition this morning, so I'm bold enough to have my button today.
Oh, good for you.
So I'm underway.
Good for you.
Yeah.
This is the third term, right?
This would be a third term, and we know third terms can be problematic sometimes, but I hope the voters recognize I'm a thoughtful, interested, concerned, and a viable candidate.
At least, like Mr. Bloomberg, you didn't have to get the law changed.
Right. There are no term limits here, except by the voters.
Except by the voters.
Right.
So looking back on this for 6 years, and we'll look forward in a few minutes, but looking back on the 6 years, what are you, I'm going to ask you both, what are your accomplishments and what are your regrets at this point?
It's interesting. In terms of accomplishments, one thing I'd like to say as a general sort of predicate to that is it's a board. Okay, there are 5 of us. The mixture changes over time. We act as a board. So while each one of us has certain interests and things we try to push along, you don't accomplish anything totally on your own, okay? So it's a board process. Things I've been interested in all along in serving, clearly the financial management and reporting structure we have through the finance department, and our annual audits have been an ongoing concern. Since I joined the board, 6 years ago, that was an important issue. We'd had several years of qualified audits, Dan. So it's taken some time, but the last 2 years have been unqualified, and I think there's been a lot of progress there.
And there's a new auditor.
We have a new auditor, and that was helpful, and I've sat on the audit committee of the town, and I think I helped push that along. You have a point of view, but I think the new auditor has been refreshing. I think he's very good, and the town is well served by that change. In addition to the audit itself, I think the financial reporting structures, working with the finance committee and with the enterprise funds, which you're aware of, to try and make the quarterly reporting and the budgeting have a summary page that helps bring sort of the business activities of those funds and make it more readily understandable.
One thing we've all learned is that the municipal accounting process doesn't really allow for useful reporting.
It makes it very difficult. So you almost have to say, here's my state reporting, but here's the real world. In fact, we're trying to set up a meeting with the Department of Revenue to talk about that, because their reporting structures really create some limitations that aren't productive for the town. So we'll see where that goes.
What else can
Dan, I've also, since I've run, sort of the whole water quality issue has been an important thing. And I was involved with the board when the Article 68 committee went to town meeting and then was set up, the fertilizer board. And I think at that point, one of the things I do believe in is kind of inclusiveness, making sure we, as a board and a town, reach out to the stakeholders. And in that case, it was the interest I had was to make sure the landscapers and other members of the community, in addition to sort of conservation groups, were involved in the process. And when the committee was set up, it was a broad-based committee. And I think the town has been well served by that process. Unfortunately, it's slowed down a little bit during the past, say, 9 months. The management of the regulations and setting up a licensing protocol has been assigned to the Natural Resources Department. And they've been somewhat diverted in terms of their energy with the Baxter Road project. So we have to make sure we find a way to get that back along. Implementing the fertilizer regulations has a lot to do with the water quality in the harbors and our ponds. So it's an important thing to carry on.
One of the issues that keeps coming up, one of the criticisms, if you will, of the town, and it would be relevant in the case of the fertilizer regulations, is enforcement.
Yep.
And the lack of proper enforcement. And the response that often comes back is, well, we get along and we don't need to spend our time and
Yeah,
money.
we go along to get along,
Yeah.
but it's interesting. I think as we've grown as a town, and a lot of these things have filtered out, that we are talking about a sort of a person within the public safety complex, the police department, to work on enforcement, and we're talking about a part-time staffing person that can help out there. I think there are lots of areas. I would say another example of that is our lighting bylaw. A few years ago at town meeting, the town meeting adopted a lighting bylaw, sort of the Dark Skies Initiative. I think it made a lot of sense, but its implementation is not always as across the board as it ought to be.
Other areas like the HDC and their rulings, whatever you think of how the HDC is functioning, it really doesn't matter in terms of getting enforcement of its
I think that's true. One of the things as a general thing, I think the HDC and the Conservation Commission have really been critical in helping our community develop in a way for the long term. Our resources, whether there are beaches or open moors, our historic buildings, are really what make the economy run here. And both those entities, I think, deserve the support of the board in a broad sense. And I'm committed to make sure that happens, because they've had some rocky times.
They have. What do you have any regrets of things that haven't been accomplished that you would like to see?
Well, there's I think, for example, in the finance area, a regret is sometimes it takes longer than you'd like to have for change to occur. But it's the reality of dealing with a municipal government. One of the other things I think I feel really good about in terms of my participation for the past 5 or 6 years or more, we've lived within our revenues. That hasn't always been easy. If you go back to the 2008 recession, the 28, those were difficult times, and the town had some tough adjustments to make. They were made. We started to come back from that. We're increasing some staffing levels in a couple of areas, but we did that without having to have the sort of broad dislocation that other communities in the state did. So
and still are, I gather.
Well,
I was reading about Wareham.
But we've been very fortunate in that regard.
We've also been fortunate in that our tax base has grown.
Our tax base has
grown significantly, unlike many other communities.
Right, and actually, construction the past couple of years has come back. We can see that in our fees are increasing again. They're not back to the level where they were in 2007, but they are coming back, and that helps the sort of implementation of policies and staffing and programs.
Looking forward, what new things would you like to see?
New thing. I think at some point we, as a community, really have to sort of resolve this space needs issue, and decide how we're going to proceed. And my guess is, in the end, we're going to find a program that commits to keep the administration and the finance department and sort of the other staff-oriented functions that ought to be near the town manager downtown. And that may involve some expenditures, and they could be significant. We had a program a couple of years ago to redo the police station and the NRTA building, and I think that's at some point going to come back on the agenda. Probably, I think the community recognizes that planning and the building department out at 2 fairgrounds makes sense in terms of service to our constituents.
For access purposes.
So I think we're going to work with both those spaces. We got to formalize it, get it underway, but it sometimes come back to town meeting. And we've got a lot of other capital issues.
That raises another issue sort of in the area of enforcement, because the move to 2 fairgrounds was, quote, temporary, to get around the town bylaw, which says, in effect, there should not be any, the town officers should stay downtown.
Right.
How do we rationalize that kind of thing?
Well, it's the bylaw, because I think when you pick through it, you can find that you're in compliance, or the move was temporary. So there's a little bit of political legerdemain in that, Dan. I think the reality is the board had some discussions this year about whether or not to ask town meeting to look at that bylaw again and see if they wanted to remove it. We decided not to do that, but at some point we're going to have to get back to that and say, town meeting, let's be realistic about what we're doing here.
Maybe when you have a plan in place.
We had a plan a couple of years ago, and then we pulled back. And I think we pulled back. Partly the finance committee was concerned, which That's fine. Looking at the cost and the longer term plan, and to make sure we really had it laid out in a way that everybody could understand. So that's one of the goals that we have to accomplish. I think there continue to be some public concerns about the overall financing program for the Sewer Enterprise Fund and what's going to happen to line extensions into the needs areas. As you know, the town committed up to $700,000 to update the comprehensive wastewater management plan. We expected that in December, but now we're looking for June for a completion, and then we have a sewer planning work group that's going to look at that, and so that's another issue. And I think, I bring to the board a sort of a long history of experience with these, and I think I'm committed to information-based decision-making on the board, and it can help with these as we go forward.